And I think we're going now. Okay, so let's just look at this one. And what I give you is a set of observations of our overhead, and we have the total overhead cost. We have our machine hours. And in this question, we're determining that machine hours are going to be the driver for us. And this question called out, okay, if you are using the high-low method, how would you come up? And the first thing it asks us is for the variable cost per machine hour. Okay, now the way I'm putting this question together, I'm going to have you derive in our practice here the variable, the fixed, etc. On the test, we may only ask you for one of these, right? We'll ask you for the variable, we'll ask you for the fixed, or something like that. I'm trying to make this a more comprehensive example so you can see how the high-low method ties together with our predetermined overhead rate, etc. Okay, so if I'm using the high-low method now, my job is to figure out first what's the high month and what's the low month here. Okay, and if we're doing this, we're probably doing this in a year of advance of needing the predetermined overhead rate, or 6 months. So we're doing this in June of 2016, and we're going to use this overhead rate in, say, January 2017, whatever, right? Okay, so you start to take a look at this, and what do you think is the high level of activity? Looks like June is the high level of activity, 3157. Okay, and I'm of the opinion that the hard part with these questions is to just find the high and the low, because I look at the table, my eyes start to spin on these a little bit, right? Okay, good. If that's the high, then what is the low? July is the low, 3065. Okay, good. Good job. Okay, so we got the low, we've got the high. Now, I'm going to suggest that you bring a highlighter with you to class so that you can go ahead and highlight, so you don't, because for me, I figure out the high and the low, and then I start doing the calculations, and I forget which one was high and which one was low, and I got to go back and find it again, and I end up wasting time, right? So bring a highlighter so that you can highlight it, I think, is the best way to make sure you don't lose it. Okay, so now that I know the high and I know the low, what do you want me to do with that? Divide. So you want me to go ahead and do what? Put the high of 48. I was such in a hurry to put the subtract sign, I forgot to finish writing the number. Put the 48, 548 minus what? 47, 733. And I'm going to divide that by the difference in the activity at the high and the low. Hello? Yes. Okay, 3157 minus 3065. And when I do that, anybody got the math for me on that? It's going to be 850 over 92, you say? Over 15? 815 over 92, okay? 815 over 92. Divided by 92, and that should give me something pretty close to this 8.86. Is that the answer? Okay, so that's my variable cost per unit, right? Right? Okay, so now that I have my variable cost per unit, I can come over, and there's how they showed us, you know, how they did the solution. Okay, we just did that up there. Okay, and now they want me to figure out the fixed cost, right? Well, if I'm going to figure out the fixed cost, and they told me, and I can use either the high or the low. Since the solution here used the high, how about if we use the low? We'll go on the down low with this. Okay, so we're going to pick up what? Total cost at low is what? 47733. That's the total cost, right? And I subtract off the variable cost at that level of activity. Variable cost at that level of activity is going to be what? 8.86 times, and what's my low level of activity here? 3065? 3065, right? And so if I take my total cost minus my variable cost, what do I get as the answer? What do I get as the answer? 0.1, okay. And that gets us pretty close to what they showed us there using the high, and that's the answer to that question, right? Okay, so again, you can use the high or the low. If you're a high person, use the high. If you're a down low kind of person, use the low. It doesn't matter, right? You could use either at that point, right? Okay, now remember, guys, just to think about it theoretically, all we're doing is we're sitting here and we are picking the high and the low levels of activity here, okay, and charting 2 points on this cost function, right? This overhead cost function. Are all the points going to line up on that line? The reality is that what? The points will probably line up and down along that continuum, and we are simply assuming that these costs behave about like they have at this high and low rate, and we're just going to sit there and do a rough approximation.
So when I was doing it on my own, I didn't round out the machine hour,
Uh-huh.
and I got a different answer. So next time I'll make sure to round it or something.
That gets a little bit tricky. What did you get? So you're saying that you took when you say the machine hours, you mean the variable cost?
Yeah.
So when you did this calculation, you got what? 8.85 what?
8.85869562.
869. Call me, I'm up in the club. 8 point what? 85869 what?
5652.
5652.
So I just left that in my calculator and
Right.
rounded.
Right. You left that in the screen of your calculator and you stuck that big old number right here, right? And when you did, you got what as your answer? When you stick that big number in there and you get a different number for our variable cost minus our total cost, you got what? Right, she's going to get a different number, right?
I got 20,581.
20,581. Oh,
0.097.
0.097. Okay. Okay, now here's the takeaway. If we're doing this for money, in practice, I would say, hey, you need to use that 20,581 because that's giving us more precision on this thing, right? But if you look at the test situation, there's no other answer that is closer that number is closer to, right? So you get the same number if you use you get the right answer, I should say, if you use the rounded versus the unrounded. Okay, and I can't stand up here and tell you that you should always use the rounded or always not use the rounded because these test banks do different things. Sometimes the guy who put together the test bank used the unrounded number. Sometimes he used the rounded number, but there's never a situation where rounding has you debating between two choices. Okay, so from a test taking standpoint, you'd get the right answer. Well, again, it's what I just said. Okay, if I'm doing this for money in practice, I'm using the correct number, the unrounded number, right? If I'm taking a test, I'm trying it with the unrounded number maybe. I'm get the precise answer, I'm good. If I so happen to stick in the the rounded number I would have gotten exactly if I so happened to stick in the unrounded number. Again, I'll get a slightly different answer, but if you got to choose one of these, you got to choose the right one, don't you? I mean, the one that's closest to it. I don't know what else you guys want me to tell you. There's no way I'm going to be able to sit here and say, always use the unrounded. There's no way I'm going to be able to say to you, always use the rounded number. I don't have that because I don't know what they do with these test banks where maybe when the person figured out the answers, they used what? They used the rounded or the unrounded. I'm not going to sit there for every single question and make sure. In fact, I don't have that option because they give me the questions in advance. So there's nothing I can do to control that it's always the rounded or always the unrounded number. But I'm telling you that it will always be, whether you use rounded or unrounded, there'll only be one right answer. You won't be sitting there saying, is it this or is it that? I don't know because it's giving me some choices that are close. For example, I'm not going to give you as a choice here 20,580, 70, let's see, 580. And you're sitting there saying, does John want me to use 20,577 or 20,581? I guess 81's a little. We're not going to be doing that. Clearly, you can see that what? The other numbers are far enough away that 20,577 has to be the correct choice here, right? Okay. Why are you guys looking at me like that? What do you think? You think you want teddy bears to come out and say, you got the exact? You want Dora the Explorer to show up and tell you made it or something? I mean, you got to sit there and you got to roll with the fact that we're going to get a slightly little different number if you round or don't round, but you're clearly going to be able to see the right answer. Okay. Now, if you sit there and you don't know because of something on rounding, there's one person that you can talk to during this exam. Who is it? Me, and you can come over and say, am I doing this right? Am I getting this right? I got this one around, and I'll help you to figure out that. I'm not here to test your ability to, round out numbers. Okay? All right, good. So let's come over then, and let's take a look at this next one. And we say, using the same facts as question 1, Wetzel, whatever their name is, estimates that it will use 3,300 machine hours in 2017. What is the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? So what do? Well, I first have to, and there's a hidden step in here that, if you would have known that you need to take. And for this particular test, I didn't break it down for each step for my students, have that be an answer to the question. But the next step would have been to have done what? Come up with the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, right? Right? So how do I come up with the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? What do I have to do? First, I have to come up with the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, which is going to be to take my what? Take my 3,300 machine hours, right? I want the rate, don't I? So to come up with a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, I need to take my formula here, which was what? My variable cost per machine hour, which is what? 886. I'm going back, pen back. Right there, the 886. 8.86 times what? Times the 3,300 actual machine hours plus what? Plus the fixed cost of 20,577, right? And when I add all that up and do the math on that, I get what? 49,850. You said, sir? Huh? 49815? Okay, good. Then what do? Divide that by the machine hours. And do I get a predetermined overhead rate of 1510, I hope? Right? Okay, so once I come up with the predetermined overhead rate, and in some questions, we may just say to you, What's the predetermined overhead rate, right? And I shouldn't say that. I should say I may have asked you what's the total overhead, right? And the total overhead, estimated overhead, is 49,815. That could have been the answer to another question, right? Here I sit here and I just say, give me the predetermined overhead rate. You have to know to take that estimated overhead, divide it by the estimated number of hours to give you the predetermined overhead rate, right? Question? Yes, sir. If you took the machine hours times the 886 times the 8.86, that no, that gives you the variable portion of the overhead cost. That's why you have to add the fixed cost in to get the total overhead, right? I have had some students that want to take that variable number, that 8.86, and then they'll come up with a fixed cost per unit number by taking the 20,577 and dividing that by the number of units, okay, and then adding those two numbers together. I don't advise that doing it that way. I think that you're going to maybe make a mistake in there. That to me seems a little too cumbersome because then you have to divide and you have to add and then you have to divide again, right? Divide, and add, and I don't like that. I'd rather you just kind of stick with what we've done. We've sat there using the high-low method to come up with a formula, y equals mx plus b, total cost equals variable cost times x plus the fixed cost. Just plug in your factors now, and you have them, right? And then once you get the total cost in this question, you had to divide that by the estimated number of hours. That gave you the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. I think that's a better way of doing it. Okay? Question? Okay, good. Now that we have that, let's go ahead. We got the 1510, and we're going to start accumulating. You can see, what was your name, sir, that had the question? Tim. You can see, Tim, how they kind of did it sort of the way I wrote it up there. You're saying, why are you writing it if it's right there? Because sometimes I forget that it's right there, and I just go ahead and start writing it, okay? But that's how you would do it. Okay? All right. Now, we come over, and now they want us to start looking at this table over here, and we keep coming down, and they want to know what is the cost of job 1, 2, 3. Okay, so if I need to get the cost of job 1, 2, 3, what costs go into a product like this product 1, 2, 3 that we're making? Huh? Okay, good. So we're going to call this manufacturing cost, right? Those are our manufacturing costs. Okay, go ahead. So you're going to tell me it was direct materials was the first one, I think you said? Okay. Good. Got the direct materials 375. Nice. Anything else? Direct labor, and I guess I'm going to have to do a little figuring on that. 8 hours, I guess. Times how many hours? Times how much per hour? $53. Finally, we got someone making some decent cash over here, right? I got tired of those questions where it was $11 an hour and we're paying the guy, right? Okay, so how much is that? 8 times 53? Huh? 424. Good. Anything else? Got my direct materials, got my direct labor? I don't think so. Huh? Okay, hang on now. Don't go too far off into the mountains. I won't be able to bring you back. I'll have to send the search team after you. Now, what happens? We're sitting here, and we just came up with a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, didn't we? Didn't we just? Huh? These two questions are connected. And maybe when I gave this test, I should have said, using the same facts from the previous question. But I figured since they were both Wetzel, people would realize that. But I did have some people say, well, I didn't realize it was the same question. And I'm like, well, it's Wetzel. But anyway, so what happens? I already came up with the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate a minute ago, didn't I? and I'm supposed to apply the overhead to each job, right? Okay, so if I have a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, and what were we using in this problem? Machine hours? We were using machine hours as our driver. Okay, so shouldn't I take that predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? What did you tell me it was? What did we calculate it as? 1510? Here it is right here. 1510, right? And then I just have to figure out the machine hours that were used on this particular job. And I guess that was given to me up here on this first page, or the previous page was what? There it is, 10 hours of machine hours. See the 10 machine hours? 10 machine hours times that predetermined manufacturing overhead rate of 1510. And so that gives me 151 for my overhead. Got to pick up my overhead for this job too, right? 151. And that total is what? 950? Right? Okay, so a little bit tricky there, the way I presented this. We don't do this on your midterm. When I present a midterm, I want my students to see the whole process, okay? We use the high-low method to come over the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. We apply it to jobs, don't we? Okay, and then, of course, we add in our direct materials and our direct labor. So now we're seeing the whole process here, right? Okay, question? Okay, good. So now, question? Guys, we're good? Okay. Okay, so now we come over and I say, assuming that we have a sales price of 3,000, what is the gross profit? And remember, gross profit is sales price minus what? Minus the cost of goods sold is going to give me my profit, and the cost of this job is 950, isn't it? We just figured it out. So this is where, what, managerial accounting, this is where B meets A, right? And that instead of just having purchased an already produced product as a retailer where whatever we paid for it is its cost, we had to gather and calculate the cost of this thing, didn't we? Okay. And so what happens? We take this 3,000 and we subtract the 950. And that better come to 2,050, or I'm going to be very upset this morning. Right? Okay? Okay, good. So then I start asking you journal entries. Okay, and I say, what of the following journal entries would have been made on job 123 as job 123 was started, completed, and sold, and none of these other entries make any sense. A, B, and D are all nonsensical entries. So the only entry that made any sense in this whole thing was to debit the finished goods and credit the work in progress as the job was completed. Okay, so I just didn't narrow this question down to what entry should I make when the job's completed. I made you think about the whole process, and you need to pull out which of the entries is logical in this overall process, right? Okay, now the whole set of journal entries here would have been to do what? I'm just going to go ahead and put this part up on the board. Would have been to go ahead and, what journal entry do I make when I purchase raw materials? Debit the raw materials, good. Say for, I don't know, 100,000, just going to make some numbers up here. And credit cash, let's say. Or it could be accounts payable, but right? Quick cash is fine. Good. Okay, then what? Now I start to requisition my raw materials into production, right? Okay, and so if it turns out that I'm issuing some raw materials for my direct labor, what journal entry, for my direct materials, what journal entry should I make? Credit raw materials. Say, what did I say? Did I give a number? 40,000? Whatever. I'm just making this up. And debit what? debit the work in progress for the 40,000, right? Okay, and say this is for a particular job. Work in process now got a debit in there 40,000, doesn't it? Okay, so the balance is 40,000. Okay, good. Now I have to apply some direct labor, and let's say my direct labor is $8 an hour for 10 hours. So what's that? 80. Uh, uh, $8 an hour for 10,000 hours is 80,000, right? So I go ahead and I'm going to debit what? I'm going to debit work in progress for 80,000. I can't find a good pen this morning. How about this one? I'm going to debit work in progress for what? For 80,000 and credit what? Salaries payable, whatever. For 80,000 and put the debit to work in progress 80,000. So now work in progress has how much in it? 120,000, right? Anything else? Anything else for work in progress for the production of this product? Good. Got to do my manufacturing overhead. Very good. Let's say I'm going to use direct labor hours. I said it was what? 10,000 direct labor hours. And I'm telling you that my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, which I came up with using the high-low method, coming up with it like we just practiced, and I'm just making up that my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate is $4. Now let's not make it $4 because that'll give me another 40,000. I don't want that two numbers the same in this little example. So I'm going to make it $5 per direct labor hour, right? How did I come up with this number? High-low method. Good. I could have used regression analysis, whatever. We're not going to talk about that, obviously, in this class, but we are going to think about the high-low method. But anyway, the overhead then is 50,000, isn't it? So now I've got a debit to work in progress for the overhead of 50,000. Let me go ahead and put that in general journal form. Debit the work in progress 50,000 and credit my manufacturing overhead applied. For 50,000, right? Okay. And so what do I have in here now? 170? Okay, good. So that job is done now. And as that job is done, what do? I finish this job. Let's say I finished 160 worth of this job. I finished 160 worth. So I'm working on a couple of different jobs. And I have completed now $160,000 worth. Finished goods, right? Right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to debit my finished goods inventory for, what did I say, 60,000 is done? 160, I mean. Thank you, is done. And I'm going to credit what? Work in progress for 160,000, right? Okay. And so when I credit work in progress for 160,000 now, when I credit it for 160,000, how much is left here? 10,000. Okay, good. What do I call these numbers? I had my direct labor. I had my direct materials. I had my direct labor. No, manufacturing overhead was only the 50,000 part of it. I'm asking this total. What, this 120, this 170 is what? Those are my manufacturing costs, right? Right? Okay, good. What do I call this number, the 160, the amount that got transferred out of work in progress and went into finished goods? No, not actual. What do I call that number? No. Actual and applied relate just to manufacturing overhead. I'm taking all of these costs now out of my work in progress. That's a credit to my work in progress account right here. This is work in progress. I'm taking this out of work in progress and sending it to finished goods. What do I call that number? Cost of goods manufactured. Say it. Cost of goods manufactured. Everybody. The cost of goods manufactured is the amount of manufacturing cost transferred out of work in progress and into finished goods. You need to say that on every Sunday between now and the midterm. And every day in between, too. Okay? Right? Okay, so that's very important, guys, because what's going to happen, and what I notice has happened with some of my students in the past, they get all this, but they forget what this is called. And the question asked them, what's the cost of goods manufactured? And they could have sat here and made journal entries till the cows come home, but they can't tell me what the cost of goods manufactured is, right? And they understand the whole process, but they forget that stupid definition. Manufacturing cost, right, are what gets added to work in progress for the period, right? Very important terms that you need to know. And I know it's annoying, because, that's not going to get you any hits at your next party. Hey, did you know that the cost of goods manufactured is the amount that gets transferred from work in progress to finished goods? If you say that to somebody at a party, what are they going to say? Oh, man, I can't stand talking to that guy. At least that's what they used to say about me. Anyway, so what happens? You sit there and you get to a point where you just don't talk to anybody anymore, right? Except yourself. Okay, so what happens? You got to sit there and you've got to know those terms, right? Okay, it's not like a history class where you can say, did you know George Washington had wooden teeth? Really? Okay. What about if I sell 150,000 worth of this? Huh? That's going to be journal entry. Debit to cost of goods sold. You just told me, right? 150,000. And credit to what? Credit to finished goods. That's just like 101A now, except we called it finished goods instead of just inventory, right? Okay. Okay, good. What if I gave you a question in which I told you that the beginning balance in work in progress was 0. The beginning balance in work in progress is 0. My manufacturing costs for the period are, what were they in this problem? What were the manufacturing costs in this problem? 170,000. The manufacturing costs are 170,000. The ending balance in work in progress is what? 10,000? And if I ask you what are the costs of goods manufactured, can you answer that question? Without looking at the board and seeing what I already told you the cost of goods manufactured were on this? Can you set this up? Can you set this up? Well, we know it's 160,000. I just looked at it. Can you set it up?
Your beginning plus your manufacturing cost minus what's left.
That's not how I like to do it. Okay, that's maybe the way McGraw-Hill thinks you should learn it, or Wild, or whatever his name is. Okay, and so what happens? I like to do it this way. I like to take the beginning balance. Beginning balance is what? 0. I know I have the adds for the period because I know that what? the manufacturing cost is my direct labor, my direct materials, my manufacturing overhead that's going to be the debit to work in progress, right? For the period. So I go ahead, I stick that in. And then I like to just take what they give me. I like to use the ninja approach. I'm not going to fight the problem to adhere to anything. I'm just going to sit there and I'm going to put what the ending balance is because I gave you that, didn't I? And so then what? So the question is, how do you get to from 170,000 here, this subtotal? How did you get from there to the ending balance of 10,000? You must have done what? You must have subtracted, good, 160,000. And since we subtracted 160,000, that means that is the amount that went to finished goods, which by definition is my cost of goods manufactured, right? Guys? Right? Okay? All right, that's the way you need to be able to do this. And I could ask you anything here. I could have asked you the ending balance. I could have asked you, of course, the beginning balance would be a little too easy for you, so I don't think I'd ask that. But I could have said, what's the beginning balance? In this example is 0, whatever, right? But if it wasn't 0, you could use the same approach to back into it because the questions on your test don't always ask the same thing, whether it's beginning balance, ending balance. And so I don't like that approach that McGraw-Hill uses where they say, okay, this is the thing, because sometimes we give you the ending balance, and all they're teaching you is how to come up with the ending balance in that example. They're always trying to get you to come out with the amount transferred in that example, I should say, the subtract, but not all the problems ask you that. Some of them ask you the beginning balance. Some of them make you figure out the manufacturing cost for the period. If you set them up like this, then you can tackle any one of those problems, right? Okay? Question? And we'll have some of those on the upcoming practice midterms. I'm going to give you some where we had to figure out the numbers. We had some in our practice midterm for chapter 2, whatever it was, and we're going to have some more like that as we continue to practice. Question? Okay, if you're looking at your cell phone, I'm going to assume that you have this practice exam up on your cell phone, so when I walk by your table, I don't want to see reruns of Leave It to Beaver or something. Okay, you guys don't know what Leave It to Beaver is, but whatever. Okay. Question? Okay, good. Let's go ahead then and let's take a look at this next one now. And now I'm asking you, what is their over or under applied overhead for the period? Okay, so what's happening? Well, if you look at this question and you come back up a little ways, I had told you somewhere, I think it was up in that table, that the factory-wide actual overhead was what? Did I give you the whole number, or did I make you calculate it here? Factory-wide actual machine hours, and then, huh? Well, that's the factory-wide machine hours. I made you figure this out here. Is that what I did in this question? You had to figure out what the actuals were? Is that what's happening? Yeah, you got to figure out the actuals. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting problem. In that what? I'm going to make you figure out what the actual overhead is by looking at that table and figuring out which one of those are overhead costs. Right? Okay, so you look at this table, and we have factory-wide indirect materials of what? 10,000. Am I going to pick that number up? So I'm just going to do the math right here so you can see how I'm pulling it from the table. So 10,000 for the indirect. How about factory-wide actual indirect labor? Got to pick that up. 12,000. Right? How about the factory depreciation? Is that part of my actual? Got to pick that up. How about factory-wide actual utilities? Got to pick that up. How about the accounting and professional fees?
There's factory-wide actual machine hours on the other page, the previous page.
So,
Does that get included
in what?
in your calculation?
How do you want me to include that?
The actual machine hours,
Yeah,
3,700.
3,700. You want me to add that to these dollar amounts? These are hours. These are dollars. Huh? Okay. No, that's fine. That's okay. Look, ask me in here. And look, guys, I'm the coach. And I'm sitting here and you're asking me, should I run left or I should run right, right? And I'm going to say to you, well, why would you run left when the play is to the right? Because I want you to understand that we're doing this thing to the right, okay? So don't feel shy if I sit there and I make you go through a little bit to get to where I want you to be, okay? All right, so these are dollars. That's just the hours. Now we're going to use those hours to figure out the amount that is applied because we go what actual versus applied, don't we? Okay. Okay, good. So I go ahead. Any other overheads in here? Do we see any other? How about how about the CEO salary? That's what? That's a administrative expense, isn't it? Right? How about the advertising campaign? That's a selling expense. Not going to pick that up. How about accounting and professional fees? That's another administrative, right? So we don't pick up these administrative to figure out our actual overhead, do we? Okay. So I have my actuals now, and I add that up to be what? 55,000? That's 55,000, and now I'm going to drop back down to the problem. And we were at what? 55,000 for the actual, and we compare that to the applied. What's your name that asked me again? That asked me about the 3,700? Seppreet. Seppreet. So you see the 3,700? We did pick that up. That's the actual hours, and we multiplied it times what? Times the 1510 predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, right? That was the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. That's how we apply it. Okay? And so what's happening? If I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the actual versus the applied, if I was teeing up my manufacturing overhead, actual, applied, the actual is how much? 55,000 is the actual. The applied is how much? 55,870. That's the credit. Where's the debit going over here? What do I debit? What account do I debit? I debit work in progress for the manufacturing overhead. We're a long ways from cost of goods sold. We're still gathering the cost, right? So I go ahead and my work in progress is what? Going to get debited, isn't it, for the 55,870? Right? Isn't that I do with my applied? Guys, we just did it right here. The amount that gets applied goes to work in progress, right? Okay. Okay, good. And so am I over or under applied? I am over applied by what? 870? Okay. So I have an over applied amount because there's a credit balance in there of 870. That was the answer to that question, wasn't it? Right? Okay. Question? So what happens? I sit here and going back to my little table of overhead costs. Where'd that stupid table go? I had what? I had factory-wide actual indirect cost of 10,000, and I'm going to put that into my manufacturing overhead. That's on my actual side. That's my debit side. And then I have my applied side, right? Okay, so who wants to give me the journal entry for this indirect materials? For the actual indirect materials. Debit, what? Okay, we already know the debit for the actual is a debit to manufacturing overhead, right? So go ahead again. Debit manufacturing overhead for how much? 10,000. Credit what? What is it? Indirect materials? Raw materials. I'm taking this out of raw materials and putting it into work in progress. The only debit to work in progress is what? Is the applied amount of manufacturing overhead, right? Right? Okay, so I sit here and I debit my manufacturing overhead for 10,000. What do I credit? Who just said it? What do I credit? I credit raw materials for 10,000. Good. Okay, how about this factory-wide indirect labor? What do I debit? I debit the actual side, my manufacturing overhead. Good. 12,000. Is that the number? Okay, what do I credit? Salaries payable, whatever, right? For 12,000. Okay, good. Anything else up here? Factory depreciation. Good. What do I debit? I debit the manufacturing overhead. Good. For how much? 23,000? Okay. What do I credit? Accumulated depreciation, right? 23,000? Okay, good. Utilities. What do I debit? We debit the Mo. For what? Hey Mo. Hey Larry. What? And what do I credit here? Utilities payable. For 10,000. Okay. There's my debit. Anything else? The rest of these we already determined should be expensed, aren't they? They're selling and administrative expenses. So we expense the rest of them. Okay, good. So do we have a debit here? The total debits of, what is it? What was it? 50,000? 55,000? There's my total debits of 55,000, right? For my actual overhead. During the year, I work on my jobs, right? And I remember back in June of last year, based on last year's data, is where I came up with that number 1510, right? That was based on last year's work. I'm figuring, okay, this is my estimate of 1510, right? And I worked, what, 3,700 hours? 3,700 machine hours? I used the actual number of machine hours times my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate that I set up last year to help me to gather my overhead costs job to job because I can't trace utility. Looks like this eraser used about an hour's worth of electricity when we made it, Bob. Okay, that's not going to work, right? So what do? We just sit here and apply it based on how much time we use for each job, which erasers would be process costing, by the way, obviously, right? Homogeneous products, but we're not talking about that. Now we're talking about job order. For this chair, how much electricity do we use? Okay, and so 1510 times 3,700 is what? 55,870. Who wants to give me the journal entry for that? There's the credit. I know I have to credit my manufacturing overhead for 55,870. What was the debit to? Huh? Work in progress was the debit. Good. Work in progress, 55,870. And I had gone ahead and done what? Put my direct material, my direct labor in work in progress as well, right? Right? Okay. All right. So what happens? I have my credit now to my manufacturing overhead, and I have my debit for the actual. What's the difference here? 870 is the difference, so I'm over applied, right? Okay, good. Now at the end of the year, don't I want this to be 0 so I can start to gather my manufacturing overhead for year 2? Right? So I want this to be 0. How will I make it 0? Not a trick question. How will I make this account balance 0? What's the balance right now? Huh? Good. I've got a credit balance of 870, so I need to debit at 870, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and debit my manufacturing overhead for 870. Is this thing zeroed out now? Okay, I've got to credit something, don't I? Let's write actual here. I got to credit something. What do you want me to credit? You want me to credit cost of goods sold, sir? And you're saying that because you must somehow believe that that 870 is not material, right? Right, that's what the next question is going to say, that it's not material, right? It's not material, it means it's not a big amount. Okay? For example, if my net income was $10 billion, do I care if I just credit my cost of goods sold and bring it down to 9 billion, whatever it would become after that? No, right? It's not going to make a big deal. What if my net income was $1,000? What if my net income was $400? What? This move is going to do what? Triple my net income, isn't it? Well, that's not a good thing then, right? Okay, what if my net income was 0? This is going, or in a loss situation. Well, doing this of a loss of $70. Well, this will put me from a loss to a what? Positive net income. These things start to become material, don't they? Okay, but assuming it's not material, I just put it all to cost of goods sold. If it was material, I would do what? Allocate it between finished goods, work in progress, and cost of goods sold, right? Okay, but in this next question, what was your name, sir? Omar. In this next question, Omar was saying, hey, it's put it to cost of goods sold because we're looking. And notice here that I'm just asking you what will happen to cost of goods sold if I don't consider this to be material. Cost of goods sold decreased 870, didn't it? Right? Okay. Question? You guys want a break or you want to keep going? Break? Okay. Let's go ahead. Let's take a break. This seems like a good point for a break. Before we do, though, notice, what was that, applause for the break? Sorry, I thought I heard somebody clap. Okay, notice what happened here, guys. We went through a whole process here where we started out purchasing the raw materials, getting our direct labor, I should say, coming up with our predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, applying the overhead based on the actual number of hours, going ahead and as we finish the goods, transferring them out of work in progress, finished goods, out of finished goods to cost of goods sold, and then dealing with the under or over applied overhead that was sitting there at the end of the year, right? What we just described is really that entire process where the company the year before is sitting there figuring out the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate and then using that along with their direct items, direct labor and direct materials to track their costs to work in progress, out of work in progress, to finished goods, out of finished goods, to cost of goods sold. So we really looked at the whole process here in that one set of facts, didn't we? Okay, now your questions on your exam are going to be more standalone. Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And it's not all connected up to a set of related facts. I'm of the opinion that this is harder to do than that test is, because here, if you miss the first one, you miss the second one, you miss the third one, you miss the fourth one, you miss the fifth one, you miss the sixth one. Now all of a sudden you're missing 8 out of 30 questions. Now you start sweating, right, and everything starts getting going downhill from there if you don't know your stuff. So if you know these and how to do this, the stuff that you're doing in the actual test should be pretty straightforward for you in this regard, right? Okay. Okay, so you want to practice with these and the others, and I'll be putting more up. But let's go ahead. Let's take the break now. We should be good for about, maybe 15 minutes. Okay, let you go grab some coffee or something, and I'll see you at 11:15. Shape to finish up this first practice midterm here today. So let's just go ahead and take a look at our next question. Sorry, I got to find my pen. There it is. Okay, and for this one now, I'm going to go through the whole process with you before we look at what the question is asking you, because frankly, the question got a little tricky, and I think that it's not the best learning tool for the trick that I was trying to pull on this question. I kind of regret having done it that way. So let's just go through and see if we can understand what's going on with this question first, and then we'll let's look at the choices after. Okay, so we have this direct labor rate is $9, and we're going to apply our manufacturing overhead at $6 per hour. So we have our direct labor rate, we have our predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, which was given to you in this question. You didn't have to calculate it, right? It was just given to you. Okay, and then we say that the work in process inventory may consisted of one job, which we have charged what? $4,000 of direct materials. So can I figure out my manufacturing cost for this? Can I figure out my manufacturing costs? What are my manufacturing costs? My direct materials, my what? Direct labor, my manufacturing overhead are all going to go to my work in progress as my manufacturing cost, right? Okay, so how about direct material? This is going to be the easiest one I'm going to ask here, guys. What is my direct material? $4,000, right? Okay, good. How about my direct labor? $9 an hour times how many hours? Times 300 hours is going to give me now the 2,700. Okay, good. Anything else? Anything else? Manufacturing overhead, which we said the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate that was given to me in this problem, I didn't have to use the high-low method to calculate it, whatever, is $6 per hour times what? Times, and since they told me I used direct labor hours for the applying of the overhead, what's that, 1,800? Okay, good. So I'm sitting there and I have what? The total cost, my man cost here for this, my manufacturing cost, okay, just abbreviating it for man costs, is how much? 8,500? Is that what I heard? 8,500 is my total manufacturing cost, right? Right? Okay. Now, when we look at this, they tell me that the job was completed. The job was completed when? in May and transferred to finished goods inventory, right? So in May, I would have gone ahead and done what? Credited my work in progress for 8,500, and then I would have done what? Debited, good, my finished goods for what? For 8,500, right? For 8,500, and that happens in May. So probably in May, I started this job, I finished it in May, I transferred it to finished goods, right? Then they say here that in June, the product was shipped to the customer. So if I ship it to the customer in June, that means that when? In June now, I'm going to credit finished goods and debit what? I guess I'll write it over here, up here somewhere. I'm going to debit cost of goods sold now, right? Just kind of putting it up here for 8,500. Do you understand everything that just happened? Any question on everything that just happened? Again, we just went through the whole process, although we didn't have to calculate the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. We kind of picked it up from there, right? With this question? With me so far? Okay. Now, this is what I don't like. If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't have put this question on this test like this, the way I did. Okay. I ask you the balance in the work in process department on May 31st. Answer is what? Is 0 because I would have transferred it out. See how it got a little tricky? Everyone wants to put what, 8,500 is the balance in May, but I transferred it out in May, didn't I? So it's actually 0. See the answer to that one? Why it's 0? May 31st, I transferred out 8,500, right? Is there a question on the fact pattern? Yeah, and it says May 31st here. So this one's in charge. Okay, you could you couldn't have gotten the answer. May 1st, yeah, I know, because there's a lot of problems with this question. I ended up giving the students back the points on this question. For May 31st, May 1st, you wouldn't know. You're like, I don't know, because you only told me what gathered in May, right? And I should have probably also told you there was no beginning balance, which would have made this question ridiculously easy if I asked you May 1st, right? To be able to answer the last question, I really probably should have said what? There was no balance on May 1st, right? 0 balance on May 1st. And on May 31st, if we transferred everything out, then it's also what? It's also 0, right? Okay. Okay, good. Then I say using the same facts, cost of goods sold for May should be, answer is 0 because they sold the stuff in June. Okay, so I just got way too cute for myself on this question. Okay, all right. The Raiders must have lost the day I was putting this question together and decided to be mean. Okay, and then what? Then we come over and we say using the same facts from question 9, finished goods inventory balance on May 31st before we've sold the stuff is what? 8,500, right? Because it wasn't until June that we actually went ahead and sold that stuff out, took it out of finished goods and put it into cost of goods sold. So just, I started out with a good question and I ruined it, right, by sitting here and trying to get cute with these answers. Okay. Now, this part I think is pretty good. Using the same facts, if overhead was underapplied by 2,500 during May, the actual overhead cost for the month, except, there's another problem. I forgot to tell you that what? The actual direct labor hours were 3,200 for the whole company. I needed to tell you that, didn't I? Okay, so if I tell you the direct labor hours were 3,200, I take that 3,200. What was the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate in this problem? 3,200 was the hours. The amount per direct labor hour was what? Direct labor hours were 3,200. $6 per. What's that? 3,200 times 6 is what? 19,200. Okay, is that the applied or the actual? Manufacturing overhead, is that the applied or the actual? Try again. I take the number of hours that they worked, right? 3,200 direct labor hours, and I multiply it times what? Times the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. That's how I apply it, isn't it? So how much is that? 19,200? Where's the debit going? Come on, guys. What happened during the break? 19,200 is the amount that goes to work in progress, right? Right? Okay. Now, did they tell me here that I had a what? That I had an under applied of 2,500? That means that the actual has to be more than the applied, doesn't it? Right? So if I take the 19,200 and I add the what? 2,500, that means that the actual must have been 21,700, right? Which is what the question asked me here. Right? To me, that one is fair game. That would be a good question. If I sit there and I ask you what the, what I give you the numbers to come up with the applied, and I tell you that it's over or under applied, you should be able to back in pretty easily to the actual, right? Right? Question? Question? You wouldn't have. It wasn't there. I messed that question up. You would have said, John, how the can I come up with the applied if you didn't give me the actual number of hours? I would have said, really? I didn't give you the actual number of hours? You kidding me? I didn't? Jeez. The answer to number 12, everybody, is B. Put B on your Scantron, please. If I had made that mistake, which we won't make that mistake on October. What day? 17th? How can I forget that day? That's the day of the Loma Prieta earthquake, right? October 17th, 1989. If you were alive then in the Bay Area, you knew where you were. Okay. Question on this? Okay, good. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at, Jarn, is there a question? No? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and let's take a look here at some journal entries. Okay. So journal entry to raw materials for the period. I guess we needed some facts up here, didn't we? Okay. So on March 1st, we had a balance of 37,000 raw materials on hand. During the month, the company purchased an additional 62,000 of raw materials. During March, 69,000 raw materials were requisitioned from the storeroom for use in production. These raw materials included both direct and indirect materials. The indirect materials totaled 6,000. Before we look at the questions, let's just review the whole set of journal entries here. So if I purchase the raw materials of 62,000, what journal entry do I make? Huh? Good. Debit raw material. For 62,000. You're a cash kind of guy? You're one of those guys who walks around with a wad of cash with a rubber band around it, right? And just, here you go. What is it? 62,000? Got it. Not a problem. Okay. Okay. So we just go ahead and we credit the raw material 62,000. Credit the cash, 62,000. On hand means Like I come up to you and you're sitting there and I say, hey, you got any pens on hand? How many pens on hand do you have? 4. I say, okay, can I take 3 of these? How many do you have on hand now? That's on hand. Okay, so it means it's there, right? They call that on hand. Okay. Now, obviously, you couldn't fit 62,000 pounds of materials on your hand, but that's what it means, right? Okay. Okay. Now you come over, and we say that during March, 69,000 of raw materials were requisitioned from the storeroom. Requisition means requested. Hey, storeroom, can you send me some materials? We're about ready to start this job. That's the production guy saying that, okay? And so the materials guy goes, I hate that guy. Yeah, okay. Right? So they're going to send it now? Okay? So we requisitioned it. So if the storeroom is sending it to the production floor, now what do I do? Good. Credit raw materials. We know we got to do credit the raw materials. Good. For 62,000. By the way, you guys are getting real good at going ahead and coming up with the part of the journal entry that you know you got. And again, I think if you take that approach, that helps you to then kind of figure out the rest, doesn't it? Okay, so keep that up. Okay, then what? Debit work in progress. Okay, for how much? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hang on now. Don't go running off the edge of the cliff. Work in progress is what? Only the 60,000 for the direct, right? Where's the direct? Well, they don't tell me the direct. They tell me what? They tell me indirect was 6,000, and so, well, not 60,000, but what? 56,000 is work in progress? What's going to happen to that remaining 6,000? Manufacturing overhead, the actual, isn't it? For 6,000? Huh?
Shouldn't the raw materials be 69,000 because it says very much 69,000 raw materials were requisitioned?
Well, who told me 62?
You did.
Whoever told me 62, it's their fault. What do you say? It's 69? Okay, 69,000. Just testing you.
Work in progress should be 63.
Okay, hang on a minute. Let me first see if I can get this stupid pen to work right. I don't know why it keeps graying those out. Ugh.
Because it's on eraser still.
Oh, okay. So I got to put it on back on pen to get it to work right? Okay, try it again. It still doesn't look right. I'm trying to get there, but I can't get the pen to work. Give me a second here. Okay. So I got what? 69,000. Sorry, guys. 69,000 of raw materials went. Okay. So that means now that we got what? That we got 63,000? Okay, sorry. 63,000. Okay. Right? We're good now? Okay. All right. So then what happens? Now let's take a look and see what they give us as the problems here now that we kind of went through that whole set of facts. And they say the journal entry to raw materials for the period should include what? The debit of 62,000. That's when we bought them, right? Right? And only one of these is the right answer here, right? Okay. Okay, good. Come over using the same facts as question 13. Journal entries to work in progress should include, and that was the debit for just the 63,000, right? Okay. And then what? Coming down using the same facts as question 13, the journal entry to record the requisition from the storeroom included, and it did include a debit to manufacturing overhead, right? And there's that same entry that my pen wouldn't work on? Right? Okay. Okay, good. Which of the following is classified as direct labor? The what? Assembly line worker. That's, remember in the very first thing we looked at, we had the guy working on the car, and he was reaching up, and we said he's direct labor because he's working on this car. That's an assembly line worker, right? Okay. Then what? The supervisor is what? Indirect. Factory supervisors, indirect. Okay, good. The salary to the maintenance supervisor in a manufacturing plant is, yes, it's a product cost because it's going to be part of my manufacturing overhead is my indirect labor, right? Okay. It is not and it is also manufacturing overhead. Manufacturing overhead, product cost, there's also direct labor, direct material in addition to manufacturing overhead that is a product cost, right? Okay, we've got our product cost. Our product cost are what? What are our product costs? Direct labor, direct materials, and what? Manufacturing overhead. There are product costs. We also call them manufacturing costs. Remember I kept saying those terms were synonymous? Okay. And then what? And then I'm asking you if the amount paid to the maintenance supervisor is a product cost. Yes, it is, because it is what? It is indirect as part of my overhead, isn't it? Right? And yes, it is part of my overhead. So it's basically just saying, do you understand that these two terms are synonymous? Well, the product cost, that manufacturing overhead, is part of your product cost, isn't it? And the supervisor is part of my manufacturing overhead, so it's both of these, right? Right? Trying to think of an analogy here. A collie is a dog, and it is a canine. How do you spell canine? Is a collie a dog? Is a collie a dog? Is a collie a canine? Well, I'm assuming you know that they call dogs canines because they have that tooth right there. Okay, so a collie is a what? Is a dog, and it's a canine, isn't it? Okay, that's all that's saying. It's two different things, way to call out the same thing, the supervisor. Okay? Okay, when the level of activity decreases, variable costs will decrease in total, right? Not per unit. Per unit, now they stay the same regardless of the level of production, up or down, right? Okay, good. Which of the following costs expressed on a per unit basis would be expected to decrease as the level of production increases? And so what's happening? Let's say I have fixed, I guess in this example, manufacturing overhead. And let's say it's $100,000, and I produce 1 unit. That says 1 unit. What's my cost, fixed cost per unit? Not a trick question. $100,000 is my fixed cost per unit, isn't it? Okay. Let's say my fixed costs, they stay the same, or 100,000 regardless of the level of production. And now I produce 2 units. 2 units. What's my fixed manufacturing overhead cost per unit? 100,000 now, right? Divided by how many units now? 2 units. It's now 50,000 per unit, isn't it? So what happens? If the level of production, well, I went the wrong way. If the level of production decreases, so I probably should have started here and went to here to make my example relevant to the question, then what? Then the fixed cost per unit will what? Increase? Guys, you're not going to get a simpler thing like this here in Ohlone College, I don't think, okay? Let me do it again. If I'm sitting here and I've got $100,000 of fixed cost, and I'm telling you that I'm producing 2 units. What is my fixed cost per unit? Not a trick question. $50,000, right? Okay. If I decrease from 2 units to 1 unit, is that a decrease in the number of units? That's a decrease in the number of units from 2 units to 1 unit. What is my fixed cost per unit? 100,000. So what happened? My fixed cost per unit increased as the level of production decreases, doesn't it? Right? If I had been producing 3 units, then my fixed cost per unit would have been what? 33,3333 and 33 cents or something stupid like that, right? And what happens if I drop from 1 to 2? Now I'm going to what? 50,000 per from 2 to 1, 100,000 per, right? So as my manufacturing level decreases, my fixed cost per unit increases. If I go the other way and I do what? I increase my production, my fixed cost per unit decreases, doesn't it? Okay? Okay. Now you come over and we say that a sunk cost, when this is way back, what, chapter 1 or 2? I forget where we were doing definitions. Okay? A sunk cost is what? A cost that has already been incurred, right? And so it is not relevant to my decision. And that was when I was going through and the movie producer was trying to get you to star in their movie for millions of dollars, and you would not consider the amount you've already paid for tuition, right, in deciding whether or not to, skip college and go to Hollywood, right? Now, if you were looking at the millions of dollars more you can make if you just stick with your business degree, that would be what? That would be an opportunity cost, and that would be relevant to your decision, right? Right? Okay. Okay, good. A company which would use process costing. Did we have this one? We had gas before, right? Natural gas. We use that in the example. Okay, here we have what? Here we're talking about an oil refinery. When it is homogeneous goods, we use what? Process costing. One tank of oil cannot be distinguished from another tank of oil, right? These others, and this was the other way to answer these, is to think of the ones that would clearly use job costing because each one is unique, right? Okay. Okay, good. This company makes wallets, and here's their last month's cost. Which of these are conversion? How about direct materials? Is direct materials a conversion cost? Direct materials not a conversion cost. Conversion costs are the costs that we incur in order to what? Convert materials into product, right? And so we incur our direct labor. We incur our manufacturing overhead to turn materials into wallets, right? Now, if I asked you what are the prime costs, what would you do here? Well, instinct should tell you that what? Now I got to pick up direct materials. We got prime cost, we got conversion cost. Direct materials are a prime cost. Are either of the others a prime cost? No, yes they are. Direct labor is not only considered a conversion cost, it's also considered what? A prime cost. So that for that one, the answer would be whatever that comes out to. What? 390,000. 390,000. Okay. Now I told you this was annoying. That, well, why do we have to have these stupid names? Prime cost for both my prime cost for my labor and also conversion cost for my labor. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, this is just something that they do. But where it becomes relevant is when we start practicing with questions from chapter 4 and we start using our equivalent unit production calculations. We're going to be talking to you about what? We were this much complete as to prime cost, this much, this much complete as to materials, this much complete as to what? Conversion costs, and you're going to have to know to pick up your labor and your overhead for that, right? Okay, good. Well, this was just asking me this is prime, this is conversion. So if I'm trying to get conversion, it's 155,000, right? The two I checked up there, plus 82,000. Gives me the 237. Different question that I wrote over here. Okay? All right. Process costing is most likely used when we are producing chemicals. I mean, when you're making bug spray, you don't sit there and say, okay, what's the cost of each can of bug spray, right? You just make the bug spray and then you sit there and use process costing, right? These others, aircraft, construction, printing, right? So the good way to remember this, again, is to either eliminate the ones that are clearly job costing, okay, versus ones, if what's being produced is coming out like this, guys, that's process costing. If what's coming out is, let me put a little this, a little that, that's going to be what? Job board costing, okay? Now, I had a situation where the students got mad about printing. They wanted to say that printing is process costing. And I'm sitting there saying, okay, go over to Kinko's and tell them that each job that they do is homogeneous. If you come in and you make one copy of a paper and walk out, that's a lot different than a guy who comes in and makes 50,000 color copies with bindings on them and everything else, right? So each printing job is also unique, isn't it? A color print job is going to be different than a black and white job, right? So printing is also considered job order. Okay, good. Come over and let's take a look at this one. Country Furniture manufactures furniture, and they give us this table of information, and they want to know the direct materials. So if you look at this list and you're making furniture, can you figure out which one is direct materials? How about the depreciation on sales office staff? Is that materials? How about depreciation on the factory equipment? Is that materials? How about factory super salary? Is that materials? How about sales commission? Is that materials? How about lube used in factory equipment? It's a material, but it's not a what? It's not a direct material, so I'm not going to pick that one up, right? I'm looking for direct materials here, right? Lube is indirect. Okay, insurance. No. How about wages paid to the factory maintenance workers? That's labor, not material. How about fabric used to upholster furniture? That's material. You got to pick that up. I had a class one time, someone asked me, what's upholstery? We know what upholstery is, right? It's the stuff that goes over the furniture, like leather is an upholstery, fabric is an upholstery. Okay. All right. What else? Cost to deliver. Is that material? How about wages paid to the assembly line workers? No. How about the lumber used? That's a direct material, 82,000. Anything else? That's it. So it's 92,000. Is that the answer? If it's not, I got some fancy footwork to do here. Okay, it's 92,000, right? Okay. How about the direct labor cost? How about amounts paid to assembly line workers? Remember the graphic of the guy working on that car? He was an assembly line worker. We picked him up. That was the only one that was direct labor there, right? Okay. Okay, good. Manufacturing overhead cost. Okay, let's see if we can figure out which one of these are manufacturing overhead costs. And I'm going to go ahead and I guess I'll sort of total them up here. How about depreciation on the sales office? Sales is not manufacturing, right? So I'm going to take that out. How about depreciation on the factory equipment? Yep, got to pick that up. That's 16,000. Good. How about factory supervisor salary? Yeah, he's indirect, and what? She or she's indirect, and it's factory. 50,500. How about sales commissions? No, those will be expensed, right? Okay. How about lubricants? Indirect materials, got to pick those up. How about insurance for the factory? Got to pick that up. How about wages paid to the factory maintenance workers? Got to pick them up, right? Those guys who fix all the machines and keep them running. We don't sit there and figure out how much time you spent maintaining each machine, right? 115,000, right? How about, we know it's not fabric. How about cost to deliver? I mean, how kind can we get here by telling you that that is a selling expense? Oh, I guess they did that. Oh, no, delivery to customers, though. If it was what? Delivery for materials? No, because we would include that in our materials, right? And then we would determine if it was direct or indirect, depending on whether we issued it for indirect or direct activities, right? Okay, so no, there's no way delivery would be included. We know it's not wages paid. How about lumber? No. How about utilities in the factory? Okay, so that's 54,500. See how this is kind of cool too because the line goes up as the costs go up. See how I did that? Okay. I'm just kidding because I'm not drawing in a straight line. How about anything else? How about utilities in the sales office? That's what? That's not factory. So I add all those up, and do I come to the correct answer here, which was what? When I add all those up, do I come to 260,000? Somebody verifying that for us? 16 plus 50,500 plus 3,000 plus 21,000 plus 150,000 plus 54,500. Is that 260,000? Huh? It is? Okay. Do we have a second? Colleagues? Are you going to back your brother's play here? We're good? Okay. All right, good. Good job. Okay. Conversion costs. Conversion costs are going to be what? Overhead and labor, right? Okay, so did I already get the overhead here? I got the overhead as what? 260, and I know that the what? The labor I had up there was 155, 500. Do I get that number? Okay. Okay, good. Again, testing just definitions here, right? Okay. An example of direct labor would be what? Are you getting that assembly line workers are direct labor? I think we've had like 3 or 4 questions where you needed to know that, right? Okay. Allocates overhead based on machine hours, selected data for the most recent year, predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. We're back to that, right? Okay, but this one, I had to call out the ones that were overhead, didn't I? To get the answer? Okay, so is no, they don't have I have to figure out, should I use the estimated or the actual for this? The estimated is what I'm going to use to come up with my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate so I can apply that to my jobs. That's the credits to manufacturing overhead. The debit is to work in progress, right? Right? Hello? So what am I going to use? The estimated of 235,000. Divide that by what? Huh? By the estimated number of machine hours of 20,000, right? That gives me a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate of 1175. The problem set, was that the highlighted answer, I hope? 1175? Okay, good. Using the same facts, what should be the applied? Why is this so hard? Look, guys, we did it 97 times now. 1175 is the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, and I multiply it times what? Times the actual number of driver machine hours in this example that I've incurred for the period, which is 22,500, right? Right? We've done this a number of times now. This is like they should be deja vu to the point of nauseum here. Right? Okay. Okay, good. Come over. Oh. Oh. No more? Question? Okay, so what we're going to do next time, because I think you guys have had enough of this, is the other practice midterm that I put up this morning. We're going to start with that next time, and then start looking around Sunday, and you will see some more practice midterms up there. And I want you to go ahead. You can take a quick look at those, whatever, and come to class prepared, because starting Monday, the sort of monologue of me standing up here doing it starts to end, and I start saying, okay, come on up. Who wants to show me how to do this one, how to do that one, right? Because we now got to get out of the mode of observing and the mode of what? Doing, right? So you want to take a good look at those questions, start to get ready for that portion of our prep for the midterm. We got lots of time. We've got a good amount of time to get ourselves together on it, but you can start to see how you're going to have to start to really, apply some brain power to some of these questions. Okay, question? There's no sign-in sheet today. Don't take that as a indication that there won't be in the future. Question?
Yeah, on the
Hang on, guys.
on the practice questions,
Yeah.
is there any way of getting rid of your highlights so that we can actually practice?
Sure. In Word, just go in and highlight everything first. Hit highlight. Here, I'll show you right now. Hang on, guys. Hang on, in case other people have that same question. So let me go here. The way I would do it, because it's hard to unhighlight each one, right? It takes forever. So the way I would do it is I would go in, I'd click the highlighter, and I would just go ahead and highlight everything. I guess first, do this for everything. I'm not going to go through the whole page, through the whole thing, because it takes forever with all these things I have in there. You see how I'm doing that? Okay. You see how I did that? Right? And then I'm going to hit the highlighter. And when I do, now everything is highlighted, but that's awful looking, isn't it? You probably don't want that. So what you can do is go ahead and then hit no color. Oh, you got to re-highlight them all. Not. Oh, see, yeah, you could have done it that way. Control A. Yeah, that's probably easier than doing it that way, right? But I can't hit Control A because I'm in the tablet mode. But yeah, you could hit Control A and that would highlight everything. Okay, but if you do it this way, you go ahead, you highlight everything again like that, and then you hit no color. And when you do, it takes the highlighting out, assuming I did this in some sort of half-decent manner. And it would have unhighlighted everything. But do me a favor, save it as a different file. Otherwise, then you got to sit there wondering. Well, you can still get it back off of iLearn if you want. Back up off of Canvas if you want at that point, because it's already highlighted in Canvas. Or save it as a different file. Okay, but that's a good question. That's a good thought. That is a good way to go through these. If not, before Monday or before we go through these together, certainly before you're taking the test, you should be sitting down, going through, and not having the crutch of the answers, right? Okay, guys? All right, I will see you on Monday. Study hard. Have a good weekend.